The moment my mother grabbed my arm and pulled me toward her like she was about to introduce me to the president, I knew I was already in too deep. "Helen," she said, beaming at my aunt across the table, "come meet James's girlfriend." Across the table, my Aunt Helen set down her champagne flute and turned around with the slow, deliberate satisfaction of someone who had been waiting years for this exact sentence. And standing next to me, wearing a pale blue dress she had bought 40 minutes ago at a boutique 2 blocks from this hotel, was Clara Reeves, a woman I had met exactly 4 hours before. She didn't flinch. She didn't look at me with panic in her eyes or squeeze my hand too hard. She just smiled, the kind of warm, easy smile that made people feel like they were the only ones in the room, and extended her hand to my aunt. "It's so nice to meet you," she said. "James talks about you all the time." I had never mentioned my Aunt Helen once. But here's the thing about Clara, and I didn't know this yet, 4 hours in. Standing in the middle of my sister's wedding reception with a glass of sparkling water sweating in my hand, she was better at this than I ever could have prepared for. And somewhere between that moment and the end of the weekend, the act stopped being an act. The problem was I didn't notice exactly when it happened, and by the time I did, I was terrified it was too late to do anything about it. Let me take you back to Thursday afternoon because that's where this actually starts. Not at the wedding. Not at the hotel bar where I made the worst, or maybe the best, decision of my adult life. It starts at Gate 17 of the Pittsburgh International Airport, where my flight to Charleston was delayed by 3 hours, and the only open seat near an outlet was next to a woman with a suitcase covered in travel stickers and a look on her face, like she was already reconsidering every choice that had brought her to this moment. I didn't talk to her. I sat down, plugged in my phone, and started going through the 17 unread texts from my mother about the weekend. The wedding was Saturday. I was arriving Thursday to help set up and, according to my mother's carefully worded messages, to finally bring someone. Her exact words were, "James, your cousin Derek is bringing his girlfriend, and even Marcus is engaged now, and I just want you to be happy. Sweetheart, Marcus is 53 years old. But sure, Mom, I'll race him. I hadn't brought someone because there wasn't someone to bring. There hadn't been anyone serious in almost 2 years, and explaining that to my family over a long wedding weekend felt about as appealing as explaining it through a megaphone. My family doesn't ask politely. They ask in groups. They circle you at the buffet table, and by the time the main course arrives, you've somehow agreed to let 3 different aunts set you up with their friends' daughters, was on my 4th scroll through my mother's texts when the woman beside me said, without looking up from her own phone, "Whatever they're telling you, it can wait." I looked up. She was still looking at her screen. "Sorry?" She glanced over. Brown eyes, dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had started the day more organized. "You keep sighing," she said. "It's very loud." I wasn't aware I was sighing. 3 times in 4 minutes. I counted. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the first thing that came to mind. "My sister's getting married this weekend. My entire family is going to spend 3 days asking me why I'm not." She nodded slowly, like a doctor recognizing familiar symptoms. "That kind of weekend. That exact kind." She set her phone face down on her knee. "I'm going to a friend's bachelorette party in Charleston," she said. The bachelorette canceled. The party is still happening because 40 people already have non-refundable flights. I have been asked to arrive, pretend everything is fine, and be cheerful for 72 hours. I stared at her. "That sounds terrible." "It genuinely is." She held out her hand. "Clara, James, she repeated, like she was testing how it sounded. "Well, here's to surviving the weekend." We talked for about 40 minutes, about the wedding, about her friend group, about the general horror of being the single one at an event designed to celebrate everyone else's happiness. And then our flights were called and we went our separate ways. Didn't think about her again. Until the hotel bar. My family had taken over. Most of the Hargrove Inn, a beautiful old colonial building about 20 minutes from the venue. I arrived Thursday evening, checked in, survived 30 minutes of hallway ambushes from relatives I hadn't seen in 2 years, and retreated to the bar with a specific mission. 1 quiet drink before my mother found me and started strategizing. The bar was quiet. Dark wood, soft lighting, a bartender who moved like he had nowhere to be. I sat down on the stool farthest from the entrance and ordered a whiskey. "Neat." "Same," said a voice 2 stools down. I turned. Clara was sitting there with her travel sticker suitcase propped against the bar, still wearing the same clothes from the airport, looking at me with an expression that somehow managed to be both surprised and completely unsurprised at the same time. "You're at this hotel." I said. "You're at this hotel," she said. "The Bachelorette is here." The booking at the Meridian fell through. There are 40 slightly frantic women on the 3rd floor. She accepted her whiskey from the bartender with both hands. "You, 2nd floor. Half my family is on the 4th. We looked at each other. The bartender set a bowl of mixed nuts between us and retreated. "How bad is your situation?" she asked. My Aunt Helen already asked if I was seeing anyone. I said things were complicated. Clara tilted her head. "That's the worst possible answer. Complicated means they have 3 days to fix it." She was right. I picked up my whiskey and didn't say anything for a moment. The bar hummed quietly around us. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear the distant sound of 40 women discovering their new hotel arrangements. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "How good are you at improvising?" Clara set her glass down and looked at me with the careful attention of someone who has just realized the conversation has turned a corner. "That is a very specific question. I have a proposal. It is completely insane, and you are absolutely allowed to say no, and we never have to speak of it again." She folded her hands on the bar. "I'm listening," so I told her. The family, the aunts, the group questioning, my mother's texts, the 3 days of being the project. And then, "I don't need you to be my girlfriend. I need you to be convincing for 72 hours. In exchange, you get a built-in excuse to miss whatever parts of the bachelorette party become unbearable. And I owe you a real dinner, not wedding food. Wherever you want, after this is over." The silence that followed was long enough that I started forming my apology. Then Clara said, "We met 6 months ago." I blinked. "What?" "That's our story. Long enough to be serious. Short enough that you don't have 100 stories they can quiz you on." She picked up her whiskey. "What do you do for work?" "Architect." "Good. I'm a graphic designer. That's real, so I won't slip up." "We met at a conference. First date was coffee, then dinner. Then you drove me home and we talked in your car for 2 hours before I finally got out." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading from a file. That detail always lands with mothers. I stared at her. "Have you done this before?" "No, but I've watched a lot of people do it badly." She looked at me evenly. 3 conditions. 1, we agree on the story tonight and stick to it exactly. 2, if at any point I'm uncomfortable, we end it and you back me up, no questions asked. 3, the dinner you owe me is somewhere with a real menu, not a place with QR codes. "Done," I said immediately. She nodded once. "Then you should probably know my middle name is Anne, my mother's name is Patricia, and I'm allergic to shellfish. If your family is anything like mine, those 3 things will come up before breakfast." We stayed at that bar for 2 hours building a version of us that didn't exist. She asked questions I hadn't thought of. How I'd introduced her to my friends, whether we'd argued. What was the first thing I noticed about her? I asked her things too. Favorite book, where she grew up, the thing that made her laugh without expecting it. Some of it was for the story. Some of it was just because I wanted to know. I didn't examine that too carefully at the time. By 11, she was stifling a yawn and I was walking her to the elevator. "Ground rules for tomorrow," she said as the doors opened. "Don't touch me without signaling first. A hand on my back means you need me to agree with something. Squeezing my hand means someone is coming you haven't prepared me for. Got it. And James?" She stepped into the elevator and turned around. The doors began to close. "Try not to sigh so much. It gives you away." The doors shut. I stood in the hallway for a moment, alone, wondering what exactly I had just done. Friday morning arrived with my phone already lit up before I'd reached for it. One text from an unsaved number said simply, "Lobby at 8:30. Wear something that says you have your life together." See, I smiled before I could stop myself. I came downstairs at 8:28 to find Clara already in the lobby near the window in a dark green dress, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. She saw me across the room and her face shifted into something warm and immediate, a smile that moved all the way to her eyes. And for 1/2 second, I forgot it was a performance. "There he is," she said, as I reached them. She reached up and straightened my collar. It was a small, practiced gesture. Domestic. The kind of thing a person does without thinking after months of mornings together. I felt it in my shoulders. The woman she'd been talking to turned out to be one of the bachelorette party attendees. Clara introduced me as her boyfriend with the easy confidence of someone who had been saying it for years, and 90 seconds later the woman drifted off toward the coffee station. Clara dropped her hand from my collar. "Good morning," she said quietly. "You fixed my collar. It was crooked." "It wasn't. It was a little." She tilted her head toward the dining room. Your mother is in there. She's been watching that door since I came down. Your Aunt Helen texted her last night." I looked toward the dining room. Through the glass panel, I could see my mother at a round table near the window, head tilted just slightly toward us. "Ready?" Clara asked. I wasn't, but I said yes anyway. My mother's name is Diane, and she is a woman who believes the best way to show love is sustained, intensive attention. The moment we walked through that dining room door, she was on her feet. "You must be Clara," she said. "Mrs. Callahan." Clara took my mother's extended hands in both of hers. "I've heard so much about you. James loves you so much it's almost inconvenient." My mother laughed, a real one, and I stood there watching it happen and understood immediately that Clara was not just good at this. She was extraordinary at it. Breakfast lasted nearly 2 hours. My Aunt Helen joined halfway through and asked how we'd met. Clara gave the conference story with the kind of relaxed detail that only comes from someone not worried about being caught. The 2 hours in the car detail landed exactly as she predicted. My aunt said, "That's how you know." I refilled Clara's coffee without being asked, because I'd noticed she kept looking at the pot. She noticed me notice. She didn't say anything, just glanced at me for half a second with something in her expression I couldn't quite read. The rehearsal was late afternoon at the venue. White columns, long lawns, golden light. My sister Sarah sprinted across the gravel when she saw me, which seemed physically impossible in heels. "She's beautiful," she whispered into my ear while hugging me. "She can hear you," I whispered back. Sarah pulled back and looked at Clara with unfiltered delight. "I'm the bride," I gathered, Clara said. "You look so happy." Clara let my sister take her arm and lead her toward the venue, already talking. My brother-in-law Tom appeared at my shoulder with 2 beers. "She's good for you," he said. "You've known her for 6 minutes." "I know. Still." He clinked his bottle against mine. "You look different." I didn't ask him what he meant. I already knew I did. By the time we were back at the hotel, it was close to 8, and Clara and I had been navigating the same shared story for almost 11 hours without slipping once. She knew the name of my college roommate. I knew she had a younger brother named Eli. We hadn't coordinated any of it consciously. We just kept building on what the other one said, one brick at a time. In the elevator going up, we stood side by side in the silence of 2 people who are genuinely tired and don't need to fill the air. "You did that thing again?" she said, as the doors opened on my floor. "What thing?" "The coffee, at dinner. You refilled mine before anyone else's." I stepped out and held the door. "You kept looking at the pot." "I know. But you noticed." She held the elevator open and looked at me. People don't usually notice those things about me. There were several things I could have said. I chose, whoever those people were, they weren't paying attention. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She was right. But I stood in the hallway long after the doors finally closed, thinking about the way she'd said it. People don't usually notice, not a complaint, not fishing for reassurance. Just a small, honest observation from someone who had quietly accepted it as fact. It kept me up longer than I expected. Saturday arrived in gold and blue. I was in the lobby by 9, and Clara was already there, hair down, wearing something simple, coffee in hand, an unopened menu on the table. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "Your Uncle Gerald told me 3 stories about your childhood before 7:30. I now know about the bicycle incident, the county fair disaster, and what he calls the mailbox situation of 2003. The mailbox situation was not my fault, I assumed. You don't have the face of a mailbox criminal." She looked at me. "Your family loves you, James. They're just loud about it." I sat down across from her. "Has it been too much?" She considered this seriously. "No, more than I expected, but not too much." A pause. "Sarah cried a little when she talked about you last night, while you were with your uncle. She told me about when your father died, how you drove 6 hours and didn't leave for 2 weeks, that you still call her every Sunday." I looked at the window. Outside, the lawn was wet with early dew. "I didn't tell her to tell you that," I said. "I know. That's why it meant something." The ceremony was at 2, on the long lawn under the white trellis. The chairs were full. The light was exactly what you'd want it to be. Sarah walked out looking like she was made of the afternoon itself. And Tom's face when he saw her was the kind of thing that makes you believe in something. Even when you're standing next to someone who isn't really your girlfriend. Holding her hand, feeling her thumb move in a small, slow circle against your skin in a way you're absolutely certain is not part of any story you agreed to Thursday night. I didn't look at her. Not during the vows. Not when my mother started crying in the third row, but when the officiant said the word love, Clara's hand tightened in mine, just barely. Just for a moment, then it loosened again. The reception was long and warm and full of music too loud and food actually good and exactly the kind of evening that makes you wish you could hold it still for a while. And somewhere near the end, when the lights had dimmed and the night had settled into that particular soft, late Saturday quiet, Clara and I ended up alone on the side terrace. The party continued behind the French doors. Out here, the air was cooler, smelling of cut grass and something floral I couldn't name. She had her shoes in one hand, looking out at the dark lawn. Neither of us said anything for a while. "You called her every Sunday," Clara said finally. "What?" "Sarah, after your father." She wasn't looking at me. "You didn't tell me that." "You didn't use it. Most people would have found a way to mention it." "It's not a story," I said. "It's just what I did." She turned to look at me then, and the light from the French doors caught her eyes in a way that made them impossible to look away from. "I've been performing all weekend," she said. "That's the right word. You needed someone to play a part, and I played it. But somewhere in the last 2 days, I stopped knowing exactly which parts were the performance. My heart was going faster than I was prepared for. Clara, I noticed you noticed the coffee," she said quietly. "I noticed that you listened when I talked. Not waiting for your turn, but actually listening. I noticed that every time you introduced me, you said, 'This is Clara.' Not just 'this is her.' I noticed those things. James. And I don't know what to do with them because in 3 hours we go back to being strangers." I let that sit for a moment. The music drifted through the doors. Something slower now. "We could," I said. She looked at me. "Go back to being strangers. We could do that. Or we could go somewhere tomorrow morning that has nothing to do with any of this. No performance, no audience, and start over." I turned to face her. 4 hours. That's all we actually had before we started pretending. "I'd like more than 4 hours, Clara. Under different circumstances." She was quiet for long enough that I started to understand what she was going to say. Then she said, "My flight is at 11. Change it." She looked at me. "Change it," I said, and my voice came out quieter and more honest than I had intended. "I will drive you to the airport myself. I promise. I just want one morning. One real one." She looked down at her shoes, then back up at me. And then she did the thing that undid every last careful wall I had built over the 2 years before that weekend. She started laughing, not polite, not nervous. A real one, helpless and surprised, the kind that comes when something catches you completely off guard. "You're serious," she said. When she caught her breath, completely, she shook her head slowly, still smiling. "I have never changed a flight for a man in my life." "I know. I can tell. You don't know anything about me." "I know you count size," I said. "I know you order your coffee black. I know you smoothed your dress 3 times before we went in to meet my mother, and then never again. I know you thought the soup was too salty but ate it anyway because you didn't want to make a fuss. I know you cried during the vows and then looked at the sky to stop it. I know your middle name is Anne and your mother's name is Patricia and you're allergic to shellfish. I know those 3 things came up before breakfast exactly like you said." She looked at me for a long time. The party continued behind the glass. My Aunt Helen danced past, oblivious. Sarah spun in her second dress, Tom's hand at her waist. "One morning," Clara said. "One morning." She pulled out her phone, opened an app, and changed her flight. She showed me the new confirmation. The 11 o'clock had become an evening departure. 8 more hours. "You owe me more than one dinner," she said. "I know. And the next place can have QR code menus if it wants." "It won't." She put her phone in her bag and looked at me. "Tomorrow morning. Somewhere that has nothing to do with any of this. Just 2 people. No story. Just 2 people," I agreed. She held out her hand. Formal and slightly absurd, and I shook it, and she smiled. And I watched her walk back through the French doors into the warm noise of the reception. I stayed on the terrace for a long time. Long enough for the music to change twice. I thought about what Tom had said. "You look different." I thought about Clara smoothing her dress 3 times and then never again. I thought about every other small, true thing she had spent years being certain no one was paying attention to. I went upstairs, set my alarm, and for the first time in 2 years fell asleep thinking about tomorrow instead of just getting through it. The morning was quiet and pale and smelled like coffee and cold grass, and she was already at the table when I came in. No family, no performance, no story. Just Clara, hair down, wearing something simple, a menu in her hand she hadn't yet opened. It has a QR code, she said. I see that. I apologize. Sit down, James. I sat down. Outside, the lawn was still wet. The light had that thin, provisional quality it gets before the day has fully committed to itself. A waitress filled our coffee cups without being asked, and Clara wrapped both hands around hers and looked at me over the rim. No story, she said. No story. Tell me something true. I looked at her across the small table, in the early light, with no one watching and nothing to perform, and said the first true thing I could find. I noticed you before the airport. At gate 17. I noticed you before you even sat down. I paused. I didn't say anything because I didn't think I had the right to. She held her cup very still. And then you told me I was sighing too loudly, I said. And I thought, there she is. There was a silence. The morning moved gently around us. There she is, Clara repeated very quietly, like she was turning the words over, like she was deciding whether to keep them. You counted, she said. 3 times in 4 minutes. You count sighs, I said. I count things too, she smiled. Slow and certain, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind you remember. We stayed until the coffee ran out twice, and the morning turned into something warmer and fuller. We talked without a script, without a story, without any audience but ourselves. We talked about her brother Eli and the way she still calls him on hard days, not out of obligation but habit, as proof that she remembers what it costs to feel forgotten. We talked about my sister's face during the vows, how it looked like relief and joy at the same time, and how that combination seemed like the truest definition of love I'd ever seen. We talked about the things we notice and the people who don't notice us back, and somewhere in that conversation, without either of us marking the moment, we stopped being 2 people who had spent a weekend pretending and became something we didn't have a word for yet. I drove her to the airport at 5:15. We sat in the drop-off lane longer than was strictly legal. You owe me a dinner, she said. A real one. I know where. Without shellfish. Obviously, she smiled. Reached for the door handle. Stopped. James? Yeah. Thank you for the weekend. Even the parts that were a performance. She paused. Especially those parts. I didn't say what I was thinking. That the performance had ended Friday morning when she fixed my collar. I just said, thank you for saying yes. She got out. Pulled her suitcase from the back seat. Stood on the curb and looked at me through the open window. Saturday, she said. Saturday. She nodded once. Smiled once. And then she turned and walked toward the entrance, and I watched her go until the doors slid open and she disappeared inside. I pulled away and found that I was not sighing. For the first time in a very long while, there was nothing I needed to exhale. The following Saturday, I took her to a restaurant with a printed menu and real candles and a corner table and no one who knew either of us. She wore something the color of deep water. I wore the jacket again. We talked for 4 hours. Then 2 more in the car outside. 3 weeks later, she told me she had never changed a flight for a man before, and that she had not regretted a single minute of it. I told her I had started noticing her at gate 17, before any of it. She said she knew. I asked her how. She looked at me the same way she had in that quiet morning restaurant, easy and certain, like she had already decided something before I even asked. You stopped sighing, she said, the moment I sat down, and that was the truest thing either of us said all weekend. Not the story we built at the hotel bar. Not the 2 hours in the car detail that landed with my aunt exactly as she predicted. Not even the words on the terrace when she changed her flight. Just that. The silence I didn't know I'd been carrying, and the moment it finally had somewhere to go. If you've ever loved someone before you had the language for it, before you had the right, or the timing, or any reason for why this person and why now, then you already know exactly what I mean. You know how it feels to sit next to a stranger in an airport and realize, somewhere underneath all the noise, that the weekend you were dreading might turn out to be the one you spend the rest of your life being grateful for. I still have her number saved under the name I typed in that hotel hallway. The night she told me to stop sighing, I never changed it. Some things you get right without a second draft.